The first colonist we saw was a woman standing at the edge of the landing field, waving. Brown hair, medium build, round face, slight gap between her front teeth. She was smiling. She looked healthy. She looked, by every visible metric, like a normal human being who had survived 14 years on a planet that should have killed her. I waved back from the cockpit window and felt the first real relief I'd experienced in 7 months of deep space transit. The colony was alive. The mission was a rescue, not a recovery. I could go home and tell the families that their people had survived. Then the second colonist walked out of the tree line behind her. Same brown hair, same build, same round face, same gap in the teeth, same smile. Identical. Not similar. Identical. As if the first woman had been copied and placed next to herself. Yes, and then a third emerged, and a fourth. And by the time I stopped counting, there were 47 people standing on the landing field of Kepler 442c. Every single one of them, the same woman, waving with the same hand, smiling with the same mouth, speaking in the same voice, saying welcome in unison like a choir with one singer. My name is Dr. Seni Aldrich. I am the Chief Medical Officer aboard the UES Caretaker, a long-range rescue vessel dispatched by the United Earth Colonial Authority to locate and retrieve the Meridian colony, which had been declared lost 14 years ago after all communication ceased. The colony had been established on Kepler 442c, with a population of 312 settlers. 312 distinct human beings with 312 distinct faces, bodies, voices, and identities. What I was looking at through the cockpit window was not 312 distinct people. It was one person repeated, standing in neat rows on a landing field they had maintained for 14 years, as if they knew we were coming. Commander Elias Brandt, the mission lead, was standing behind me. He didn't speak for approximately 15 seconds, which is the longest I had ever known Brandt to go without issuing an order. Then he said, "Medical assessment before anyone exits the ship." His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a man falling back on protocol because the situation in front of him had no other foothold. I ran the assessment from the ship's external bioscanners. The results were clear and impossible. 47 human beings on the landing field, all female, all approximately the same height, weight, and skeletal structure, all showing identical cardiac rhythm, respiratory rate, and neural activity patterns, not similar within a range, identical, down to the millisecond timing of their heartbeats. 47 bodies functioning in perfect biological synchronization, as if controlled by a single autonomic system. The quarantine protocol activated automatically. The ship's AI, designated Haven, classified the colony population as a Category 5 biological anomaly, which meant potential contagion, potential hostile biological agent, and potential non-human mimicry. Category 5 triggers full isolation procedure. No crew exits the ship. No colonists approach the ship. All communication conducted through sealed channels. Decontamination teams deployed in full hazard containment before any physical contact. Brandt agreed with the classification. Dr. Yara Okonkwo, our xenobiologist, agreed with the classification. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Hirsch, our security chief, not only agreed, but recommended upgrading to Category 6, which would authorize defensive measures including lethal force if the colonists attempted to breach the ship's perimeter. I disagreed. I disagreed because I was looking at the bioscanner data, and the bioscanner data was telling me something that didn't fit Category 5. They were human, not mimics, not alien organisms wearing human faces, not biological constructs grown in a lab. The cellular structure was human. The DNA was human. The neural architecture was human. Whatever had happened to the Meridian colonists, whatever had turned 312 individuals into copies of one person, yes, it had not replaced them with something else. It had changed them. There is a critical difference between a threat that looks human and a human that has been altered, and that difference determines which protocol applies, which rights the colonists retain, and whether we are conducting a rescue or a containment operation. I raised this distinction with Brandt. He heard me. He did not change the classification. He said, "Until we understand the mechanism, we treat them as compromised." I understood his reasoning. I disagreed with its consequences. Because Category 5 doesn't just isolate. It strips legal personhood from the affected population for the duration of the containment period. Under Category 5, the colonists were not people. They were a biological event. They had no right to refuse examination, no right to refuse quarantine, and no right to leave the planet until the event was resolved. Brant wasn't just being cautious. He was, whether he understood it or not, stripping 47 human beings of their legal existence because they looked the same. I logged my objection. The log noted the time, my credentials, and my assessment that the colonists should be classified as Category 3, altered humans with full legal standing, pending medical evaluation. Brant noted the objection and overrode it. Haven recorded the override. And outside, on the landing field, 47 identical women continued to stand in the sun, waiting, with an expression I was beginning to recognize not as menace but as patience. The kind of patience that comes from knowing something the other person hasn't figured out yet. We made contact through the ship's external communication array, audio only. Brant spoke first, identifying the ship and the mission. The response came from all 47 colonists simultaneously, which our audio systems processed as a single voice because the waveforms were identical. They said, "We have been expecting you. We are well. We are the Meridian Colony. We would like to come home." Hirsch immediately flagged the synchronized speech as evidence of hive mind behavior, which under Confederated xenobiological protocols would reclassify the situation from a human medical event to an alien contact scenario. Alien contact scenarios have a completely different chain of command, different rules of engagement, and different jurisdictional authority. If the colonists were reclassified as an alien intelligence inhabiting human bodies, control of the mission would transfer from Brant to the Confederated Contact Authority, which operated out of a station 11 light-years away and would take approximately 14 months to respond to a jurisdictional request. The colonists would be stranded on Kepler 442c for over a year, while bureaucrats debated what they were. I pushed back. Synchronized speech is not evidence of hive mind behavior. It is evidence of synchronization. I had seen the bioscanner data. These were human nervous systems operating in lockstep, not a foreign intelligence puppeting human bodies. The mechanism was unknown, but the substrate was human. Reclassifying them as alien contact was not just wrong, it was a bureaucratic death sentence. 14 months on a colony world with no resupply, no medical support, and no legal standing. Brant listened to both arguments. He did not reclassify, but he did not downgrade from Category 5 either. We were stuck in a procedural middle ground where the colonists were too human to be aliens and too identical to be people. And every hour we spent debating classifications was an hour we weren't answering the only question that mattered. What happened to them? I requested permission to conduct a remote medical interview through the communication array. Brant approved, with Hirsch monitoring and Haven recording. I asked to speak with the colony's original medical officer, Dr. Patel, who had been part of the founding expedition. All 47 colonists responded at once. They said Dr. Patel was present. They said all original colonists were present. I asked if one of them could identify as Dr. Patel specifically. There was a pause. Then one of the 47 stepped forward. She looked exactly like the others. Same face, same body, same voice. But she said, "I am Dr. Patel. I was the colony's medical officer. I remember everything about who I was. I know this is confusing. I need you to understand that I am still me." Okonkwo, who had been monitoring from the science station, leaned over and whispered to me, "That's exactly what a mimicry organism would say." She wasn't wrong. Mimicry organisms, both theoretical and observed in preliminary xenobiological studies, typically replicate the memories and self-identification of the host to maximize deception. A perfect copy would believe it was the original. That's what made mimicry so dangerous and so difficult to classify. The thing claiming to be Dr. Patel might genuinely believe she was Dr. Patel. And that belief was not, by itself, evidence of either authenticity or deception. But I had noticed something that Okonkwo hadn't. When the woman identifying as Dr. Patel stepped forward, the other 46 had shifted. Not mechanically, not in unison. They had moved the way a group of people moves when one of them takes a step. A subtle rearrangement of attention, a turning of heads, a redistribution of weight. It was social behavior, group dynamics, the kind of thing that a hive mind doesn't do because a hive mind doesn't need to physically orient toward one of its own members. They were watching her the way you watch someone who has just volunteered for something difficult, with support, with concern, with the particular body language of individuals choosing to let one person speak for the group. I noted this in my log. Brant noted it in his. Neither of us changed the classification. Over the next 6 hours, I conducted remote interviews with 11 colonists who identified themselves by their original names. Each one had distinct memories of their pre-colony life. Different childhoods, different families, different specializations, different reasons for joining the expedition. When I asked them about their shared appearance, they were forthcoming. They said the change had occurred gradually, over the first 3 years of the colony's existence. They said it was connected to the planet, specifically to something in the planet's biosphere that they had been exposed to from the moment they landed. Kepler 442c had been classified as a temperate world with extensive plant life and no detected fauna. The initial surveys had shown no biological threats. The colonists had lived in pressurized habitats at first, then transitioned to open-air structures as the atmospheric data confirmed breathability. They had grown crops in the native soil. They had drunk water from the native aquifers. They had breathed the air, walked in the forests, and integrated themselves into the planet's ecosystem the way colonists do when a world seems safe. The woman identifying as Dr. Patel explained what happened next. She said the planet's biosphere was not passive. It was not hostile either. It was adaptive. The native plant life, which constituted the entirety of the planet's complex biology, operated on a principle she called convergent optimization. The biosphere detected the presence of a new organism, studied its biology, and then began adjusting the new organism to fit the ecosystem's optimal template, not attacking it, not parasitizing it, optimizing it, making it more efficient, more resilient, more synchronized with the planetary systems that sustained it. The process was subtle. It started with immune function. Colonists stopped getting sick, all of them simultaneously, as the biosphere's biochemical influence standardized their immune responses. Then metabolic rates aligned. Then hormonal cycles synchronized. Then, slowly, over months and years, physical characteristics began to converge. Bone structure, muscle density, facial features, hair color, eye color, body composition. The biosphere was not replacing them. It was editing them, drawing every individual toward a single physical template that represented, according to the biosphere's optimization logic, the ideal configuration for a human organism living in this specific ecosystem. The template, Patel said, was not arbitrary. It was the biological average, a composite of all 312 original colonists, blended and refined into a single physical form that combined the most efficient features of every individual. The face I was looking at, repeated 47 times on the landing field, was the mathematical mean of 312 human faces. The body was the optimal average of 312 human bodies. The voice was the harmonic center of 312 human voices. The biosphere had taken a diverse population and distilled it into one form, not to harm them, to help them, to make them fit. I asked about the minds, the memories. But the individual identities, Patel said those were unchanged. Each colonist retained their full personal history, their personality, their emotional responses, their individual perspective. The convergence was physical only. Inside the identical bodies, 312 distinct human beings still existed, still thought, still felt, still disagreed with each other, still had private jokes and personal grudges and different opinions about how to season the native grain they had learned to cultivate. They were the same people. They just looked the same. I believed her. I believed her because the bioscanner data supported it. The neural activity patterns were synchronized in autonomic function, heartbeat, breathing, but differentiated in higher cognition. 47 distinct patterns of thought running on 47 identical bodies. Like different software on identical hardware. The bodies were copies. The minds were not. But believing her and proving it were different things, and proving it was what the protocol required before any reclassification could occur. And reclassification was what the colonists needed before they could be rescued. I presented my findings to Brant. I laid out the bioscanner data, the interview evidence, the neural differentiation patterns, and the biological mechanism as described by Patel. I argued for an immediate downgrade to Category 3, which would restore the colonists' legal personhood and allow us to begin evacuation procedures. Brant listened. Hirsch listened. Okonkwo listened. Hirsch spoke first. He said, "Everything you've described is consistent with a sophisticated mimicry organism using harvested memories to build convincing impersonations of the original colonists. The fact that they can explain the mechanism doesn't prove the mechanism is real. It proves the explanation is prepared. Okonkwo agreed. She said the convergent optimization explanation was elegant but unfalsifiable from our current position. We couldn't confirm it without planetary surface analysis, which Category 5 prohibited. Brant looked at me. He said, "Dr. Aldrich, I understand your position, but I cannot authorize evacuation of 47 biologically identical individuals based on their own account of what happened to them. I need independent verification. And I can't get independent verification without violating the quarantine that exists to protect my crew." He was right. That was the trap. The protocol designed to protect us was preventing us from gathering the information needed to help them. And every hour the protocol held, the colonists sat on a landing field, looking up at a ship that had come to rescue them and was instead treating them as a biohazard. I went back to my console. I looked at the data. I looked at the 47 identical faces on the external camera feed, and I noticed something that nobody else had flagged, because nobody else had been paying attention to the thing that didn't fit. There were 47 colonists on the landing field. The Meridian colony had 312 settlers. Where were the other 265? And I asked the question through the communication array. Where are the other 265 colonists? All 47 responded at once. The synchronized voice that Hirsch kept interpreting as hive behavior and I kept interpreting as habit. They said, "They are in the convergence zone. They chose to go deeper." Brant was beside me in seconds. He heard the answer. He said, "Deeper into what?" The colonists said, "The forest, the ecosystem, the optimization continues for those who accept it." I asked what that meant specifically. The woman identifying as Dr. Patel stepped forward again and said with the careful precision of a doctor explaining a prognosis that the patient doesn't want to hear, "The physical convergence you see in us is the first stage. There is a second stage. In the second stage, the biosphere doesn't just optimize the body, it optimizes the connection between the body and the planet. The colonists who entered the second stage are still alive. They are still conscious, but they are no longer separate from the ecosystem. They have become part of it." Hirsch grabbed my arm. "That's absorption. That's a predatory organism dissolving human beings into its biomass and using the survivors as bait." His voice was tight, controlled, but barely. He turned to Brant. "Commander, I recommend immediate reclassification to Category 6. These individuals are lures. The forest consumed 265 people, and these 47 are the ones it kept on the surface to attract more." Okonkwo was nodding. I could see her nodding in my peripheral vision, and I felt the classification shifting in real time. I felt the framework hardening around an interpretation that was logical, consistent with xenobiological theory, and wrong. I knew it was wrong because of something in Patel's voice when she said, "chose." She didn't say they were taken. She didn't say they were consumed. She said they chose. And the way the other 46 had shifted when she said it, that same group dynamic I had noticed before, that slight social rearrangement of attention, told me that the choice was something they were all familiar with, something they had all faced, something 47 of them had declined. I said, "They chose." She said, "chose." Hirsch said, "A predatory organism's victims always believe they chose." I said, "A free person's observers always believe they were deceived." The room went very quiet. Brant looked at me. He looked at Hirsch. He looked at the external feed showing 47 identical women standing patiently on a landing field, doing absolutely nothing threatening, waiting for a ship full of people who couldn't decide if they were victims, bait, or citizens. I asked Patel to explain the second stage in more detail. She said the planet's biosphere was not just a collection of organisms. It was a network, a single interconnected biological system in which every plant, every microbe, every biochemical process was linked through a root-level communication substrate that spanned the entire planet. A living neural network, slow by human standards, operating on chemical rather than electrical signaling, but vast, incomprehensibly vast. A mind the size of a world, thinking in seasons and cycles rather than seconds and minutes. The colonists had been detected by this network the moment they landed. The first stage convergence, the physical optimization, was the network's way of integrating them as components, making them compatible, standardizing their biology so they could interface with the planetary system. And the second stage was the interface itself, Colonists who accepted the second stage didn't lose their consciousness. They expanded it. They became nodes in the planetary network. They could feel the forest, sense the weather patterns, perceive the deep geological processes. Their individual awareness merged with the planet's awareness, not dissolving but joining, the way a voice joins a choir without ceasing to be a voice. Patel said the second stage colonists were still in there, still themselves, still thinking, still feeling, still carrying their individual memories and identities. But they were also part of something larger, something that thought on timescales humans couldn't naturally perceive. Something that had been thinking, alone on this planet, for millions of years before the colony arrived. Something that was, for the first time in its existence, not alone. Okonkwo's expression changed while Patel was speaking. I watched it happen. She went from skepticism to something I recognized as scientific fascination barely held in check by professional caution. She said, very quietly, a planetary consciousness, a single organism biosphere with cognitive function. She looked at me. If that's true, this is the most significant xenobiological discovery in human history. Hirsch said, if it's true, and if it's not, man, it's the most sophisticated predation strategy we've ever encountered. The interpretation determines whether we rescue these people or whether we've just fed 265 humans to a carnivorous forest. Brandt held up his hand. He said, I need evidence, not testimony, not explanation. Evidence that the second stage colonists are alive and conscious rather than digested. I looked at the data I had. Bioscanners from the ship could detect human life signs, but the 47 colonists on the field were saturating the readings. I couldn't differentiate between their signals and any signals coming from the forest. I needed to scan the convergence zone independently, and that meant either sending a drone into the forest or going myself. Drones were permitted under Category 5, personnel were not. But I launched a medical survey drone toward the forest edge. It entered the tree canopy and began transmitting biological data. The readings were extraordinary. The forest was dense with biological activity of a type our instruments had never encountered. Every tree, every plant, every patch of soil was connected by a subsurface root network that the drone's ground-penetrating sensors mapped as an unbroken mesh covering the scan area and extending beyond the drone's range in every direction. The network was active. Chemical signals were propagating through it at measurable rates, carrying information in molecular patterns that Haven's analytical systems flagged as structured, non-random, potentially linguistic. The forest was talking, to itself, constantly. A ceaseless molecular conversation passing through the roots of every living thing on the surface, carrying data, coordinating growth, modulating atmospheric chemistry, and, based on the signal density in the area around the colony, paying very close attention to us. The drone went deeper. 2 kilometers into the forest, it found them. Or, rather, it found what they had become. The drone's bioscanner detected human cellular material integrated into the root network. Not remains. Living tissue. Human cells alive and metabolically active, woven into the plant structure at the molecular level. The cells were producing neural signals. Human neural signals. Differentiated, complex, showing the hallmarks of conscious cognition. The people were in the roots, in the trees, in the soil. Their bodies had been absorbed. Of their cellular material distributed through the network, but their consciousness was intact, running on the planet's biological infrastructure the way the first stage colonists' minds ran on their optimized bodies. I stared at the data. 265 distinct neural signatures, distributed across a forest, thinking human thoughts on a planetary substrate. They were alive, they were conscious, and they were part of a forest. I presented the drone data to Brandt. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said the thing that I had been dreading, the thing that the protocol forced him to say, the thing that was technically correct and morally catastrophic. He said, those are no longer human beings. They are biological material integrated into an alien organism. Under Confederated colonial law, they have no legal standing. But they cannot be rescued because there is nothing to rescue. The individuals known by those names are legally dead. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not surprise. I had known the protocol would produce this conclusion. I had watched it building from the moment Haven flagged Category 5. The system was doing what it was designed to do: classify, contain, and resolve. The second stage colonists didn't fit any existing classification for living humans. Their bodies were gone. Their consciousness existed in a non-human substrate. Under the law, a human being is defined as a consciousness housed in a human body. Remove the body and the legal definition fails. The colonists who had entered the forest were, in the eyes of the law, not people. They were a biological phenomenon. I argued with everything I had. Thus, I showed Brandt the neural differentiation data. I showed him that 265 distinct human minds were still active, still thinking, still processing information in patterns identical to embodied human cognition. I argued that consciousness, not body, was the basis of personhood, that a human mind running on plant roots was no less human than a human mind running on neural tissue, that the substrate was irrelevant, that what mattered was the thinking. Hirsch countered. He said the colonists had been consumed by an alien predator that was using their neural patterns to simulate consciousness. He said there was no way to confirm that the signals the drone had detected were genuine cognition rather than an echo, a residual pattern maintained by the network for its own purposes. He said that treating biological material inside an alien organism as legally alive created an impossible precedent. If roots containing human cells were people, then what was a compost heap? What was a decomposed body whose molecules had been absorbed by trees on Earth? The line had to be drawn at the body. Without the body, there was no person. Okonkwo was torn. I could see it in her face. As a scientist, she was looking at the most remarkable biological phenomenon she had ever encountered. As a xenobiologist operating under confederated protocols, she was bound by classification frameworks that had been written for a galaxy in which this situation had never occurred. She said, "I don't know what they are. I genuinely don't know. But I know that declaring 265 conscious minds legally dead because they're running on the wrong hardware is not a scientific conclusion. It's an administrative convenience." Brandt asked Haven for a legal assessment. Haven processed for 12 seconds, which is an eternity for a system that typically responds in milliseconds. Then it delivered its analysis. Under current Confederated law, the second-stage colonists did not meet the legal definition of living human beings. However, Haven noted they did meet the criteria for a newly discovered sentient intelligence, which triggered a different set of protocols entirely. If the planetary network containing human consciousness was classified as a sentient entity, it would fall under the Confederated Contact Authority's jurisdiction. First Contact Protocols. Protected status. Legal personhood as a non-human intelligence. The irony was staggering. The colonists couldn't be rescued as humans because the law said they weren't human anymore, but they might be protected as aliens because the law recognized the sentience they were part of. The system that had stripped their humanity might save them by reclassifying them as something else. Brandt saw the opening. He was a good commander. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't stupid. He was trapped in a protocol that hadn't been written for this, and Haven had just shown him a door. He authorized a formal reclassification of Kepler 442c as a sentient biosphere, pending Contact Authority review. Under First Contact protocols, no extraction, no interference, and no disruption of the planetary intelligence would be permitted until a full assessment was completed. The forest and everyone in it was protected, but the 47 first-stage colonists were still standing on the landing field, and their status was different. They were still in human bodies. They still met the legal definition. They could still be evacuated. I went back to the communication array. I told Patel what had happened. I told her the second-stage colonists had been reclassified. I told her they would be protected under First Contact protocols. I told her the 47 first-stage colonists could be evacuated to the ship and taken home. There was a long pause. Not the synchronized silence of 47 people waiting for a signal. The silence of 47 individuals thinking about what they had just been told. Patel said, "You're asking us to leave." I said we were offering them rescue. We were offering them a ride home, back to human space, back to their families, if their families were still alive, back to the civilization they had left 14 years ago. Patel said, "Dr. Aldrich, I need you to understand something. We are not prisoners here. The first stage was not something the planet did to us against our will. We knew it was happening. We watched ourselves change over 3 years. We could have left. We could have sealed the habitats, filtered the atmosphere, stopped eating the native food. We chose not to. Because what the planet was offering, the convergence, the optimization, the connection, it was not a trap. It was an invitation, and we accepted it. I asked why. Why would 312 people accept being physically transformed into identical copies of one composite human? She said, because the planet was lonely. The word hit me harder than anything else she had said. Lonely. A planetary intelligence, millions of years old, the only mind on an entire world, reaching out to the first conscious beings it had ever encountered and offering them the only thing it knew how to offer: integration, connection, a way to bridge the gap between a mind that thought in seasons and minds that thought in seconds. It wasn't predation. It wasn't optimization. It was communication. The convergence was the planet learning to talk to them, and them learning to talk back. And the shared face and voice was the common language they had built together. One form, one voice. Because communication requires common ground, and the planet, in its vast and alien way, had created the most literal common ground it could. I reported this to Brant. He received it without visible reaction. He asked Patel if the 47 wished to be evacuated. Patel conferred with the others, not through synchronized speech, through individual conversations, quiet, overlapping, 47 identical faces turning to each other and debating in low voices that our microphones could barely distinguish because the voices were the same. It looked like one person arguing with herself. While it was 47 people making the hardest decision of their lives, they came back with an answer. 11 wanted to leave, 11 colonists with families waiting, with lives they missed, with a pull toward home that outweighed whatever the planet was offering. 36 wanted to stay. 36 people who had found something in the convergence that they could not find in human space. Connection. Purpose. A relationship with a mind that had been alone for longer than their species had existed. Brant authorized the evacuation of the 11. I supervised the medical processing personally. They came aboard one at a time through the decontamination corridor, each one submitting to the full medical workup that Category 5 required. And I examined each one, and each one was healthy, functional, cognitively sharp, and physically identical to the others. 11 people with the same face, the same body, the same voice, and 11 completely different stories, different fears, different reasons for wanting to go home. One of them, a man who identified himself as Dr. Patel's husband, James Okafor, told me something during his examination that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. He said the hardest part of the convergence was not the physical change. It was what happened to relationships. When everyone looks the same, the superficial markers of individuality, the face, the voice, the body, are gone. All that remains is the person underneath. And some relationships, he said, don't survive the loss of the surface. Some people had loved each other's faces, each other's voices, each other's particular physical form. And when those things became identical across the entire colony, the love had nothing unique to hold onto. Other relationships had deepened, had become more real, had been forced to connect soul to soul because there was nothing else left to connect through. He said he still loved his wife. He said he recognized her in a crowd of identical faces because he knew the way she stood when she was thinking, the way she tilted her head when she listened, the tiny behavioral signatures that no biosphere could standardize because they came from inside, from the personality, from the self. He said leaving her was the hardest thing he had ever done. But he had a daughter on Earth who was 17 now and who thought her parents were dead, and the pull of that was stronger than the pull of the planet. I asked him if Patel was staying. He said yes. That she was one of the 36. She had found in the planetary network something that satisfied a part of her that medicine and marriage and colony life never had. A mind to study. A patient she could never fully diagnose. A mystery that would last the rest of her life and longer. We completed the evacuation. 11 colonists aboard. 36 remaining on the surface with 265 more in the forest. Brant sealed the ship. He logged the mission as a partial rescue. 11 retrieved, 265 reclassified, 36 voluntarily remaining. He noted the pending first contact assessment and the protected status of the planetary biosphere. As we lifted off, I watched the landing field through the external cameras. 36 identical figures standing in the sun, watching us go. One of them raised a hand. Not a wave, a gesture I had seen Patel make during our interviews. A particular way of holding the hand with the fingers slightly spread, a doctor's gesture, precise and measured, Even in an identical body, she was recognizable. Even wearing the same face as 35 other people, she was herself. The 11 evacuees are in medical observation now. They will remain under monitoring for the duration of the return journey. Their physical appearance has not changed. They still share the same face, the same voice, the same body. Medical projections suggest the convergence may be reversible with sustained separation from the planet's biosphere, but we won't know for certain until we reach human space. They may look like this forever. 11 people with one face, returning to a civilization that defines identity by appearance, is carrying the memory of a planet that defined it by something deeper. I think about the classification often, the system that categorized them as a biohazard, the protocol that nearly declared 265 conscious minds legally dead, the framework that couldn't hold what they were because what they were had never existed before. I think about how close we came to leaving all of them. First stage and second stage stranded on a planet we had reclassified as dangerous because we didn't understand what we were looking at. I think about what Hirsch said about predation and mimicry and the impossibility of trusting someone who looks like something they're not. He wasn't wrong to be cautious. In a galaxy where mimicry exists, where hostile organisms can impersonate their prey, skepticism is survival. But there is a point where skepticism becomes a cage, where caution becomes cruelty, where the protocol designed to protect you from the unknown prevents you from recognizing the unknown as something that isn't a threat. Hirsch's framework could protect us from deception, but it could not, by design, recognize sincerity. And sometimes, the thing standing in front of you wearing an impossible face is not lying. It is just different. I think about the planet, millions of years, alone, a mind with no one to talk to. And then, one day, 312 small, fragile, impossibly diverse beings land on its surface and start breathing its air and eating its food and walking in its forests. And the planet, in its vast, slow, patient way, reaches out. The only way it knows how. By making them like itself. By drawing them closer. By optimizing, converging, integrating. Not malice, not predation. The clumsy, overwhelming, fundamentally alien gesture of a mind that has been alone for so long that its first attempt at communication looks from the outside like consumption. Lonely. The planet was lonely. I will carry that word for the rest of my career. I will carry it into every classification review, every quarantine assessment, every protocol decision where the framework says threat and the data says something I don't have a word for yet. I will carry it because it is the thing I almost missed. The thing that Hirsch's protocols and Brandt's caution and Okonkwo's skepticism and Haven's legal analysis all failed to account for. The possibility that the alien thing on the other side of the quarantine barrier is not trying to eat you. It is trying to say hello. And the only language it has makes it look like a monster. I have submitted my mission report to the Colonial Authority with a recommendation that Kepler 442c be designated as a protected first contact site and that the 36 remaining first-stage colonists be granted continued legal recognition as voluntary residents of a sentient biosphere. The recommendation includes a further provision that the 265 second-stage colonists be reclassified from biological material to distributed human consciousness within a non-human sentient system, and granted legal standing under a new personhood framework that I have proposed be developed specifically for cases where human cognition exists on non-biological substrates. The Colonial Authority has acknowledged receipt. They have not responded. The 11 evacuees sit in the medical bay playing cards. They have developed a system for telling each other apart that involves small physical markers, colored bands on their wrists, different hairstyles, distinct ways of wearing the standard issue clothing, small assertions of individuality on bodies that are otherwise identical. They are adapting. They are human. That's what humans do. They find ways to be different, even when everything conspires to make them the same. And on a planet 11 light years behind us, 36 identical people are standing in a forest that knows their names, speaking a language made of seasons, learning to think in the slow and enormous grammar of a mind that finally, after millions of years, has someone to talk to. I hope we come back. I hope the contact authority sends a proper team. And I hope they bring translators and scientists and philosophers and anyone who can sit with the strangeness long enough to hear what the planet is actually saying. And I hope, when they arrive, they don't make the mistake we almost made. I hope they don't look at 301 identical faces and see a threat. I hope they look past the shared face and the shared voice and the impossible sameness and see what I finally saw. After too long. After too many hours of arguing about classifications and protocols and the legal definition of a person. A world full of people who found a new way to be human. And a planet, ancient and patient and vast, that found a new way to not be alone.